everyone, welcome back. I thought that I would film outside today because it is a really pretty day and the birds are sounding really cheerful and happy, so I was hoping that I could bring some of that ambiance into this video. Plus, I am sitting with a clear line of sight to the topic of today's video, or at least what very heavily relates to the topic of today's video, so I hope that you enjoy. I want to talk about the top 5 mistakes that I see first-time RV buyers make. There are a lot of unknowns for people going into buying an RV because a lot of the hard and fast rules that apply to automotives and mechanics and like buying a home fly completely out the window when you are talking about RVs. They are just a very unique beast in and of themselves. But it doesn't have to be a scary process and it doesn't have to be overwhelming if you know what to look out for. And I am hoping that with this video I can add to the conversation that already exists on this platform and help you be a little bit more prepared if this is something that you are considering and if you are interested in purchasing an RV for yourself. So the first mistake that I see people make is assuming that all RVs are created equal. I mean, a camper is a camper, right? You would think that that would be the case, but as with anything, you do tend to kind of get what you pay for, and there is just a wide variation of campers. I mean, you have the style like what we have that sits in the bed of a truck, you have fifth wheels, you have bumper pulls, you have pop-ups, and then when it comes to the manufacturing, there's a lot of difference. You have the clamshell style like our Bigfoot or a Scamp or a Casita, you have the aluminum sided campers like Airstreams, you have stick and tin, which is what we used to have, and you have fiberglass, which, believe it or not, has a bit of variation just within that category of itself. There are things to look out for and things to be aware of with each category of camper, but I think that when it comes to a lot of these brands, the quality and the care that goes into manufacturing them is pretty evident, and I try to always steer people in the direction of brands like Bigfoot, Casita, Scamp, Airstream, and maybe one or two other fiberglass style campers that are using the Asdel walls now, which are a much heavier duty, more wear resistant style of fiberglass. You would want to think that anything that you are putting down good money for is going to be a quality product, especially something that you're going to be taking on the road and exposing to the elements, but unfortunately that's just not the case, and I think a lot of these manufacturers try to crank out as many campers as they possibly can, as fast as they can, and unsurprisingly there can be issues that crop up when you do that. Things fall through the cracks, the manufacturing is not the best, the checks and balances that are supposed to be in place to ensure a quality product is not there. I mean, I don't think you have to look very far on the internet to find some horror stories of people who purchased RVs that were not cheap and ended up having some pretty scary issues with. And if you can avoid that, why wouldn't you? So my recommendation would be to do some research into the different styles of RV that are out there and how they're manufactured. Maybe you decide that something like stick and tin is more up your alley, or maybe you decide to roll the dice and just go with your stereotypical fiberglass camper. Whatever you decide to do, try to go into it with your eyes as open as possible so that there cannot be any surprises. With that said, the second thing that I see a lot of people do, especially the older generation, is assume that new is always going to be better than used. And while that may apply in other areas of life and other areas of consumerism, with RVs, that is definitely not the case. We know people who have spent a lot of money on brand new, fancy, beautiful campers, and 3 months, 6 months after they bought that camper, they were back at the manufacturer trying to get the warranty to cover issues that should not have existed in the first place. Everything from pipes leaking, to floors falling out, to slides not sitting securely, to electrical issues, everything. It runs the gamut. And I think especially in the last few years since COVID, with the boom and popularity of recreational activities like traveling and camping, a lot of these dealerships were trying to crank out as many campers as they could to meet the demand. And again, like I said, stuff started to fall through the cracks, and I have seen that happen a lot here in the last 3 years, but I think it's been a problem for a while. And I cannot imagine anything more frustrating than spending that much money on something and then also spending the money on the warranty and then expecting things to be good and them not being good, and taking it back to the manufacturer, telling them to fix their mess up, and the manufacturer dragging their feet on it and taking months and months and months and months and wasting your time doing it. So used campers are not a terrible way to go. They could honestly be a lot better. There are some issues that you won't run into, and even though buying used can be dicey, it doesn't have to be if you know what to look out for. And that leads into my third mistake that I see people make, which is just not knowing what to look for on a new or used camper, not knowing the signs to watch out for, not knowing the problem areas to pay attention to, assuming that because it's sitting on a lot in a dealership or because it's sitting underneath a covered garage on somebody's property that everything is going to be fine. A lot of the common issues that you want to look out for are things like delamination on fiberglass campers, which is where the fiberglass separates from the surface that it was glued to, and the side of the camper starts to look bubbly and wavy. That's not good. That means there's water intrusion, and you probably have a rotten wall, rotten ceiling, rotten floor. It could be really, really bad. Knowing where to look for soft spots, what those soft spots mean, paying attention to smells when you walk into a camper, especially if it's used, knowing to pay attention to that mildew smell, because that always means that there is water damage regardless of what the party selling it has to say about it. And on rigs with slides, paying attention to how well that slide is tracking as it goes out and comes back in, whether or not it's sitting flush at either point. Slides are notorious for having problems. I personally would never buy a camper with a slide ever again after the experience that we had with our old camper. And all of these issues, that's not just isolated to used campers. New campers have these issues as well. In fact, we knew a couple at the last place that we were working that had a brand new camper. I don't even know if they'd had it a year, and the framing around two of their slides was cracked. They had water damage on the interior. They had to replace the floor in their master bedroom, just a whole host of issues. And of course, when it came to trying to get the work covered by warranty, the manufacturer was being really weird about where they would work on it and whether or not they would cover it and how much of it, and it was just a whole thing. The fourth mistake that I see people make, and this is a big one, is buying an RV that they are not actually comfortable moving. Now, I understand it's one thing if you buy a huge RV and you're planning on parking it on a property or at a park somewhere and you're going to use it seasonally and it's never really going to move. I know there are people that do that, but I feel like a lot more people buy RVs because they like the idea of being able to take a piece of their home with them on the road and be comfortable while they travel. But I feel like RVs, especially within the last couple of years, have just gotten more and more insane. They are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the average person is just not going to be comfortable moving something the size of a semi-tractor trailer. We're talking 50 plus feet long and however tall. These things are monsters, and I think it's worth pointing out that just because you don't need a CDL to drive or move some of these RVs, doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the same knowledge and wherewithal that you would have if you had that CDL. I can't tell you how many times we've been on the road traveling across the country and we've seen somebody in a brand new truck with a brand new fifth wheel or travel trailer that is absolutely massive, and because of the way that they are driving, it's very clear that they are not comfortable with it, and truth be told, they're posing a hazard to other drivers on the road. And although I understand why people do it, just because these RVs are so huge and they're so roomy and they're so nice, speaking as someone who had an RV that was way bigger than what I needed, all of the roominess that we had inside that RV was completely overshadowed by the stress and headache it was anytime that we had to move it. And ours wasn't even the biggest that you can buy. It was 30 feet, which is very long, but we're seeing bumper pull and fifth wheel trailers now that are 40, 45, even 50 feet. It's just getting really, really ridiculous. And I think people don't think about that when they are wowed by how beautiful this new camper is and they're living out that fantasy of what recreating in it is going to be like. The reality of having to actually move it around is a little bit different. So make sure when you are shopping that you're being realistic and honest with yourself about your own abilities and limitations. And the fifth and final mistake that I see people make is forgetting that an RV, no matter how nice, no matter how luxurious, no matter how beautiful, is not a house. There are different rules that apply to RVs versus houses. There are things you can get away with in a house that absolutely do not fly in an RV. And RVs come with their own unique set of needs. For example, in a camper, you don't have the same electrical capacity that you have in a house. So if you're somebody who tends to use a lot of high-load appliances, you could potentially be flipping breakers every time you turn around, which is not good because breakers are not reusable on-off switches. Eventually they will get worn out and then you have a potential fire hazard on your hand. Another example is the black tank. We have seen so many people just keep the valve to their black tank open anytime that they are hooked up to the sewer. And you absolutely cannot do that because the way the black tank works is it kind of keeps everything in there contained, mixes it all around into a slurry, and then whenever it gets full, you dump it. If you keep it open all the time, all of the liquid will drain away and all of the solid will stay, and you will be left with what is colloquially referred to as a poop pyramid. That is something that Stuart and I had to deal with in our first camper. It was not our poop pyramid, it was somebody else's, which is even grosser. And it's something that we see a lot of people do. People just don't realize that you can't treat the plumbing in an RV the same as you do in a house. It's just not the same. There are other considerations as well, but those are the two biggest that I can think of, the two biggest that I see come up over and over again in online forums and discussions and in YouTube videos and everything else. So for these reasons and all of the others that I have mentioned in this video, if you are considering purchasing a camper, take yourself to YouTube Academy, spend some time reading up online, ask people questions. There is a wealth of information on the internet and it is all free. Nobody wants to end up in a situation where they are retroactively trying to correct things or deal with things that they were not aware of and that probably would have changed their decision-making process if they had known ahead of time. So it's like I like to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially in this case. So that is pretty much it. Those are my top 5 mistakes that I see people make. If there are others that you think are really common, make sure to leave them down in the comments section below. But that is pretty much it. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed if you haven't already. And I will have a new video again very, very soon.